Chapter 5, Seeking Help. The sun was beginning to set as Marcus and Euryale navigated the narrow, winding paths of Naxos, the scent of the sea thick in the air. The distant call of seagulls echoed around them, a haunting melody that seemed to guide their steps. The path was treacherous, but Marcus's sure-footedness and Euryale's serpents, which seemed to have a mind of their own, kept them steady. The island's rugged beauty surrounded them. Ancient olive groves stretched as far as the eye could see, their gnarled trunks testament to centuries of endurance. Wild thyme and oregano perfumed the air, crushed beneath their feet as they walked. In the distance, the azure blue of the Aegean Sea sparkled, a stark contrast to the urgency of their mission. They rounded a bend, and there, nestled among the rocks, stood a modest hut. It was little more than a shack, its walls weathered by time and the relentless sea air. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the sound of humming drifted from within. Marcus stepped forward and knocked on the door, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and apprehension. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a face as weathered as the hut itself. His eyes, however, were kind, filled with a warmth that seemed to radiate outwards. He smiled, his teeth a flash of white against his tanned skin. "Marcus," he greeted, his voice a soothing blend of knowledge and experience. "It has been a long time." "Nikos," Marcus replied, his voice filled with respect. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." Nikos stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The hut was small but cozy, filled with the scent of wood smoke and the faint aroma of fish. A small, wooden table sat in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Marcus and Euryale sat down, their eyes locked onto Nikos as he took his seat. "This is Euryale," Marcus introduced, his hand reaching out to squeeze hers. She remained partially veiled, her snakes hidden, but a few curious ones peeked out, their scales glinting in the dim light. Nikos nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Ah, a Gorgon," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have heard tales, of course, but never did I think to meet one in the flesh." Euryale shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to Marcus. He smiled reassuringly, his thumb brushing gently against her skin. "Nikos is a wise man, Euryale," he murmured. "He can help us." Nikos leaned back in his chair, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames of the fireplace. "The lore surrounding Gorgons is complex," he began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "They are said to be monsters, creatures of nightmares, but the truth is far more nuanced." He spoke of ancient myths and legends, his words painting a vivid picture of a time long past. Euryale listened, her eyes wide with surprise and wonder. Nikos's insights were both comforting and enlightening, offering a glimpse into a world she had never known. "But," Nikos warned, his voice growing serious, "if your existence is discovered, there will be danger. People fear what they do not understand, and a Gorgon, well, that is something they definitely do not understand." Euryale nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nikos leaned forward, his eyes filled with determination. "You must remain hidden, at least for now. But there are those within the local community who might help. People who understand the value of the past, who respect the ancient ways." He offered practical advice, his words filled with wisdom and experience. Marcus listened attentively, his mind racing with possibilities. He could see a glimmer of hope in Euryale's eyes, a spark that had been missing before. As the night wore on, the initial wariness between them began to dissipate. Their conversation flowed easily, spanning topics ancient and modern. Marcus talked about his work, his passion for history, his dreams of uncovering the truth behind myths. Euryale listened, her eyes shining with interest. She, in turn, shared stories of her past, of the ancient world she knew. Marcus found himself growing more empathetic, his admiration for Euryale's strength and resilience increasing. Euryale, meanwhile, became more open to his ideas for her integration into the modern world. She laughed at his jokes, asked questions about his life, and shared her own thoughts and fears. The dynamic between them shifted, hinting at a potential for something deeper than just mentorship. The late hour found them wrapped in a comfortable silence, the soft glow of lantern light casting flickering shadows around the room. Marcus reached out tentatively, his fingers gently grazing one of Euryale's serpentine tresses. The serpent coiled around his finger, its scales cool and smooth to the touch. Euryale shivered, her eyes widening in surprise. It was the first intimate contact she had experienced in centuries, her isolation a chasm of untouched emptiness. She looked at Marcus, her gaze held captive by his. The air between them crackled with charged energy, their breaths sinking in the silent moment. Unable to resist the magnetic pull, Marcus leaned in, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. His eyes flicked to Euryale's lips, full and enticing, a siren's call he could no longer ignore. He brushed his lips against hers, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of electricity coursing through his veins. The sensation was explosive, a fiery passion that ignited within them both, consuming them in its intense heat. Euryale gasped against his mouth, her breath hitching in surprise. Her serpents writhed, coiling around Marcus's arms, their cool scales contrasting with the warmth of Euryale's skin. She leaned into the kiss, her body pressing against his with an urgency that matched his own. Their kiss deepened, tongues clashing in a dance as old as time, each stroke fanning the flames of their desire. Marcus's hands roamed her body, exploring every curve and valley. He felt the smooth skin of her arms, the taut muscles of her back, the soft swell of her hips. Euryale mirrored his movements, her fingers tracing the planes of his chest, the ridges of his abdomen, the line of his jaw. Each touch was a revelation, a discovery that fueled their need for more. The air around them thickened, charged with the crackling energy of their passion. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, mingling together as their lips parted only to meet again, hunger driving them on. Marcus tangled his fingers in Euryale's serpents, the sensation strange yet exhilarating, as the creatures caressed his skin with their sinuous movements. Euryale's hands found the hem of Marcus's shirt, slipping underneath to feel the heat of his skin. He shivered at her touch, his body aching with a desire he had never known before. He pulled her closer, his hands splayed across her back, their bodies molding together as if they were made to fit. With a low growl, Marcus lifted Euryale onto the table, scattering papers and artifacts to the floor. She gasped at his boldness, her eyes darkening with desire. He stepped between her legs, his hands sliding up her thighs, pushing her dress higher. Euryale's serpents coiled around his arms, their cool scales a delicious contrast to the heat of their skin. Marcus's lips trailed fiery kisses down Euryale's neck, nipping and sucking at her sensitive spots. She moaned, her head falling back, exposing more of her throat to his hungry mouth. His hands cupped her breasts through her dress, thumbs brushing over her hardened nipples, eliciting a sharp gasp of pleasure. Euryale's fingers fumbled with the buttons of Marcus's shirt, her need to feel his skin against hers overwhelming. She pushed the fabric off his shoulders, her hands exploring the broad expanse of his chest, nails lightly scratching, leaving trails of fire in their wake. Their movements became more frantic, more urgent. Marcus pushed Euryale's dress up around her waist, his fingers finding her wet and ready. She cried out as he touched her, her body arching into his hand. Her serpents writhed with her pleasure, their movements mirroring the waves of ecstasy coursing through her. Unable to wait any longer, Marcus freed himself from his trousers. With one swift movement, he buried himself deep within Euryale, both of them crying out at the intense sensation. They paused for a moment, foreheads pressed together, breath mingling, savoring the feeling of their connection. Then, driven by an primal need, they began to move. Their lovemaking was fierce and passionate, the table creaking beneath them with each powerful thrust. Euryale's legs wrapped around Marcus's waist, pulling him deeper, her heels digging into his lower back. Her serpents coiled around them both, adding an extra layer of sensation to their intimate dance. The room filled with the sounds of their passion, skin against skin, breathless moans, and whispered words of love and desire. Marcus was. Now, Nikos began, his voice gentle but firm, we must consider your safety, Euryale. The world has changed much since your time, and not all changes have been for the better. Marcus nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. We need a safe place for Euryale to stay, somewhere she won't be discovered. Nikos stroked his beard thoughtfully. There is an old lighthouse on the far side of the island. It's been abandoned for years, but it's sturdy and isolated. It could serve as a temporary refuge. Euryale's eyes lit up at the suggestion. A lighthouse? She asked, her voice filled with curiosity. I've never seen one before. Marcus squeezed her hand, a smile playing on his lips. It's a tall tower with a bright light at the top, used to guide ships safely to shore. It's perfect, isolated enough for safety, but with a view of the sea and the stars. They spent the next hour planning, Nikos providing invaluable information about the island's hidden paths and the best ways to avoid detection. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to set in, the weight of the day's events taking its toll. Nikos offered them a small room for the night, a gesture they gratefully accepted. As they settled onto the narrow bed, Marcus pulled Euryale close, his arms wrapping protectively around her. Are you okay? He whispered into the darkness, his breath warm against her ear. Euryale nodded, her serpents nuzzling against his chest. I'm overwhelmed, she admitted. But not in a bad way. Everything is changing so fast, Marcus. It's exhilarating and terrifying all at once. He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. I know. But we're in this together, Euryale. Whatever happens, we face it side by side. She smiled, snuggling closer to him. Together, she echoed, the word of promise on her lips. As they drifted off to sleep, their bodies intertwined, Marcus's last conscious thought was of the journey ahead. It would be dangerous, filled with unknowns, but with Euryale by his side, he felt ready to face anything. The soft light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the window when Marcus awoke. For a moment, he was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing him. Then he felt Euryale stir beside him, and everything came rushing back. He watched her sleep, marveling at the peaceful expression on her face. Her serpents were coiled loosely around her head, some of them draped over his arm, their scales cool against his skin. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he would do anything to protect her, to keep her safe in this strange new world she found herself in. As if sensing his gaze, Euryale's eyes fluttered open. She smiled up at him, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Good morning, she murmured, her voice husky. Marcus leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. Good morning, he replied, his voice filled with warmth. Are you ready for today? Euryale nodded, her expression determined. As ready as I'll ever be. What's our first move? We need to get to the lighthouse, Marcus said, sitting up and running a hand through his tousled hair. Nikos said he'd provide us with supplies and directions. Once we're there, we can plan our next steps. They dressed quickly, the anticipation of the day ahead filling them with nervous energy. When they emerged from the room, they found Nikos already awake, preparing a simple breakfast of bread, cheese, and olives. As they ate, Nikos gave them detailed instructions on how to reach the lighthouse, along with warnings about areas to avoid. He also provided them with a bag of supplies, food, water, and a few basic necessities. Remember, Nikos said as they prepared to leave, his voice grave, trust is a rare commodity. Be careful who you reveal yourselves to. The world may not be ready for the truth you carry. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. We'll be careful, Nikos. Thank you for everything. As they stepped out into the early morning light, the island spread out before them, a world of possibility and danger. Marcus took Euryale's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Ready? He asked, his eyes meeting hers. Euryale nodded, her serpents coiling protectively around her shoulders. Ready, she replied, her voice filled with determination. Together, they set off towards the lighthouse, their hearts full of hope and trepidation. The journey ahead would be challenging, but as long as they had each other, they felt ready to face whatever trials lay in store.